Word up, this is Daniel Libby here. We've got a guest here. We're at the U of T Law School. We just saw the G20 Exposed, the Freedom of Expression event. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, I'm David Schneiderman. I teach constitutional law at the University of Toronto.
Nice. And what did you think about the event? We saw a bit of the movie G20 Exposed, G20 Operation. What did you think?
Well, Adam's documentary made my blood boil. It's fabulous that he was able to collect all of that important documentation, and that kind of work keeps things on the front burner, which is an important project, I think, in the aftermath when the G20 events tend to recede to the back of our minds.
Right. And you mentioned that you're a constitutional law professor, and we've heard of a lot about what's happened in the G20, some shocking things, and there's also shocking things revealed in the Ombudsman report by the Ombudsman of Ontario. Do you have any comments on what's been going on? What are your thoughts on everything?
Well, on the Ombudsman's report, we owe the Ombudsman, I think, a great deal of thanks for having dug around in internal Ontario ministry emails and documentation. The Ombudsman lays down interesting timelines and also rationales that were offered for the secret regulation under the Ontario Public Works Protection Act that only came to be known once a York University graduate student, Dave Vasey, was stopped and arrested at the fence on Thursday for failing to identify himself, invoking his constitutional right not to identify himself.
Well, with the charges against me, I showed up for my court date, and when I looked at the docket, I was informed that I wasn't on it, and so spoke to the Justice of the Peace and presented the charge sheet and said, I was supposed to appear, and at the time, they said, well, this is pretty highly unusual that your files would be missing. So, and of course, next couple days, the word from the Star came out that they had, in fact, lost the charges in the mail, ostensibly, and so I was under. I can still be charged if they decide to recharge me, but they have apparently come out and said that they won't recharge me.
And then being arrested and charged under that 1939 law that was enacted to protect Ontario public works buildings, transmission lines and such, once Canada declared war against Germany. So it was the invocation of that act that then gave rise to the Ombudsman's investigation. And the reports really as a treasure trove of details about what the police and Ontario officials were thinking. And what we learned principally from the Ombudsman's report is that there was no need to invoke the Ontario Act, that in fact the Toronto Police Service and the Ontario Provincial Police, who declined actually to request the aid of that and extra authority of that act, both were of the belief that the powers under that act would be helpful and perhaps add legal clarity, but really were unnecessary. And I think the Ombudsman's report makes clear that this was an exaggerated use of authority without any good justification. The Ombudsman undertakes a constitutional analysis applying the guarantee of freedom of expression under Canada's Constitution, and he concludes that not only was there a limitation or abridgment of Canadian free speech rights, he finds that the justifications offered don't meet constitutional standards. That is, that there's no real defensible constitutional justification for limiting free speech in these circumstances based on the arguments that were made in the lead up to the G20 event.
Right. And the shocking thing that he reveals, talking about over 1,000 people arrested. And then he, at the time of when he released this Caught in the Act report, he was talking about that there was like less than 100 charges still going on. So that's like over 90, something like 90% of the people, just totally released charges, charges dropped. When this happens, can the police officers that are doing the arrests get in any trouble for this? Is there any recourse that all these people that were arrested and charged and everything was dropped? Like, is there anything, you know, what do you think about this as a law person that studies the law?
Well, it's regrettable that the oversight of Toronto police force isn't more aggressive, so that officers involved in many of these unconstitutional activities, we can guess probably 900 people were unconstitutionally arrested or detained or charged that weekend. We would hope that independent police oversight would provide kind of aggressive disciplining of police forces in the aftermath of the G20. We haven't seen that. Really, it's only at the behest of newspapers like the Toronto Star that they seem to be taking any kind of action. Beyond that, the hundreds of people who were dehumanized during the G20 events, kettled on Sunday, for instance, in the pouring rain for several hours. Some of their interests might be vindicated by some of the class action suits that have been launched, at least a couple I'm aware of, that might be able to address some of these illegal and unconstitutional actions. These class actions are taken by one individual on behalf of a class of individuals, namely all those who may have been similarly affected by police actions that weekend. The hope is that a court will come to vindicate constitutional rights and may award what are called charter damages against the police, which would award them some sum of money. It needn't be very large because cumulatively it may amount to a large sum and should be a huge embarrassment to public authorities in Ontario if it were to be so awarded. So that's where some of the hope lies, is through some of these class action lawsuits. Perhaps in the few prosecutions that will proceed, there might be some vindication of constitutional rights. Ultimately, we probably need some kind of independent inquiry that is not focused on any one specific element of the G20 weekend, like the Ombudsman's report, which was focused specifically on the Ontario regulation issued under the Public Works Protection Act. We need something much more broad-based and that would cover multiple levels of government.
Right, and what did you think about the Ombudsman's, I think its recommendation number 1 was actually to repeal or to revise or replace the Act. That's what it was, to revise or replace the Act, Public Works Protection Act. What do you think about that?
Well, that one's a pretty easy one. The Act is largely not used outside of Ontario courthouses and the Ontario Provincial Legislature. I mean, the Act largely has fallen into disuse. Nobody knew about it, but some insiders in the Toronto Police Service and the Ontario Provincial Police Force. So if it's not used, then it's not necessary. So that's a pretty easy case, it seems to me.
Right. And the last thing I was wondering here is just because we're at the U of T Law School here, Flavel House, and I was wondering, what are you thinking about the next generation here? The students, like, are students of the law, are they taking this G20 issue, you know, as something they're studying? Like, what do you think about the students of today and this whole G20 issue?
Well, it's a great question. The fact that we had this forum here in January 2011, I think, speaks to the engagement of University of Toronto law students with the issues that were raised in the summer of 2010. There's a significantly sized working group that is conducting research, and that research is being funneled into various other organizations like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association or the Ontario Bar Association as they make recommendations for law reform. So it's wonderful that our students are putting their skills to work on behalf of vindicating constitutional rights and trying to remedy our legal structure so this kind of thing doesn't happen again. I suspect there would have been more engagement if law students were around in the summer of 2010. Typically they disperse. There are no classes held here. And of course the University of Toronto itself shut down that very weekend so that there wouldn't be any staff or faculty available. We were prohibited from actually entering our offices that weekend. So the fact that the law students here continue to be interested in the issue, I think, is a great credit to their political awareness and legal skills. And the hope is that as this carries on, they'll continue to be interested, because this is no mere 6-month or year-long project. It's going to take, I fear, much longer than that.
For real, yeah. Thanks a lot for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Public inquiry! Now! Public inquiry! Now!
Word up, Word of Mouth Wednesday. We're here. We got the director here of one of the top movies you'll see in Toronto, G20 Toronto, formerly known as the G20 Toronto Exposed, now known as the Under Occupation G20 Operation. Adam, what's the word here?
There's just an event here at the U of T Law School, the Asper Center, and it was organized by a student group working on G20 matters. So it was about an hour-and-a-half event. I got to speak for a few minutes, and I showed 20 minutes of my movie. So I showed the Chapter 9, which was the kettling at Queen and Spadina. And then we also had one of Alex Hundert's lawyers. So he was there talking about all the stuff that he's gone through, and then we had also a professor here at U of T talk about some of the constitutional issues, and then we had a few questions, and yeah, it was a really great event.
Awesome. So how about the other presentations? Did you learn anything? Was there anything that stood out for you from what was said?
Well, clearly all the stuff that's happening to Alex Hundred and these 19 other people charged with conspiracy, the lawyer really explained how really quite ridiculous all this was, and you know, he was tried to be quite unbiased and just explain the facts, but any rational person listening to the facts, you know, it all seemed you know, definitely wrong, and the police were way out of line with the way that they're pursuing these conspiracy charges. And as it turned out, what I sort of found interesting was he said that the most serious charge that Alex Hundred is now facing is that he apparently wrote down the license plate numbers of some of the Crown prosecutors. So that actually is turning out to be the more serious charge that he's facing, even more serious than his initial G20 ones. So actually, he's seemed to have maybe gotten himself in even more trouble afterwards. So, you know, I don't know what evidence there is of him doing this or what he meant by that, but hopefully, you know, I don't think, you know, hopefully he'll be acquitted of all this nonsense.
For real, yeah. And you can get a lot more information if you check out the documentary that you made here, Adam.
If they refuse, and they have a right to refuse, then they may leave. And they will leave without being arrested. If, on the other hand, they try to force their way in, they can be prevented from entering. That's a very different thing than what you have described.
Okay, so your friend didn't want to tell the police who he was, so he's been arrested for the time being, okay? Right now he's just been arrested.
So what's the arrest for?
For failing to identify himself.
On Tuesday, it emerged that special police powers that the media reported had been given to police for the duration of the summit, powers that the Globe and Mail suggested were unlimited, had in fact never been given. Although a temporary regulation was passed in secret on June 2nd, making the fenced-off security zone around the summit subject to the Ontario Public Works Protection Act, the so-called 5-meter zone that supposedly gave police the right to demand identification from anyone within 5 meters of the fence never existed. When asked on Tuesday if the 5-meter rule had been in effect, Toronto Police Chief Bill Blair said, quote, "No, but I was trying to keep the criminals out," end quote.
There's no official protest here today yet. The big one is tomorrow, but already we're seeing some evidence that police are using that new power that they have under the new regulation.
And that's one thing that I was wondering about, though, just because there's some confusion, because people know G20 Toronto Exposed, and now we've got a different title here. I guess why was the title changed for that?
Well, basically, I started initially a blog after the G20, and it was TorontoG20Exposed.blogspot.com. And then I initially called my movie the Toronto G20 Exposed, and I had released a bunch of various versions, because I really wanted to get this information out really quickly. So the first version was, you know, really poorly edited together and really poorly made, and as the months went by, as more footage came out, as I had more time to edit it, I kept editing it and updating it. So now that I've had this final version, I decided to re-release it under a new website, Under Occupation, because I got underoccupation.com. And so it sort of works pretty good, or works pretty well to have underoccupation.com as sort of the umbrella title for a series now with 3 documentaries, with the Toronto G20 documentary as sort of the one that draws a lot of people in. It's very relevant to Canadians, and then hopefully after they see that and they say, wow, this documentary really opened my eyes about what happened at the G20, maybe I'll watch these other 2 documentaries and see what they're all about, and I think people will find them equally as convincing as the G20 one.
After you were charged, though, it sort of got out in the headlines that this law has secretly been placed in, and then they started talking about the 5-meter rule, and then reports started coming out that it never existed. I guess, like, what was your impression of this, the secret law or the 5-meter rule situation?
Well, it was obviously meant to intimidate activists. I mean, the reason why my friend and I were selected for profiling by defense was, due to we had activist propaganda. I was wearing a bag saying, Homeland Security since 1492, and my friend had a sticker saying "No Olympics on Stolen Native Land," and we were profiled, and they were looking to arrest activists, and we had been harassed and detained at that point a couple of times by the police, and so that was essentially the motive for invoking kind of those laws, was to arrest anyone who looked like an activist at the time.
Responsible protesters and civil rights groups who took the trouble to educate themselves about their rights prior to the G20 had no way of knowing they were literally walking into a trap. They were literally caught in the act, an act of public entrapment. The Public Works Protection Act and its pernicious regulatory offspring.
When I was arrested by the Toronto police, there were as well Montreal police officers who did not have any physical contact with us. Once my friends were arrested and taken out, one of the Montreal police officers came into the gymnasium, and he recognized me because he asked me whether I knew Freddie Villanueva. I don't want to go into details too much, but when he looked at the Montreal police officer who had handcuffed me, give you. Donc, he said that I should be taken somewhere else because I had information. So I was taken in the opposite direction from where the buses were going. I was taken in a regular police vehicle and to a police station. And when we got there, I was filmed, and the various charges were repeated: unlawful assembly, breach of peace, and that's what had been mentioned in the gymnasium. So, and in French, I was told that I was involved in riots. I was searched. Then 2 inspectors in civilian clothing took me up to their office, a small room, to question me about why, who, where, and so on, what I had been doing during the Saturday protests. The questioning went very well at the beginning. And about halfway through the interrogation, the inspectors were not satisfied with my answers. And so they started to use a sterner tone. They talked about a fucking little princess from the middle class.
have certain rules in this committee as far as language, and I made mention of it last meeting that even if it's in a quote, we don't use vulgarities like that.
Okay.
And so, thank you.
But we use them at the police station.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, have I been recognized? Mr. Chairman, I think that it is fundamental for the witnesses to explain to us what they were told by the police. How can she explain this? The officer told me that. How is she supposed to put this? Otherwise, she would be interpreting the words of the police officers. This is a very special context where very violent language was used against these women, and it's very difficult for them to even say what was said to them. But this is the reality of what they experienced. This is brutal language.
Away from the testimony in any way. If there was language used that we have here is what we call unparliamentary language, then you can make a written, you can, and the chair sits as trying to maintain order of the committee room.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
I'm just saying, so that now Mr. Davies has...
Mr. Chairman, you are editorializing a question to challenge the chair. The question should immediately be put by the rules. There is no debate on that motion. You're debating, and you're trying to editorialize before the motion. That's totally inappropriate, and your job as chair is to follow the rules of procedure. The rules of procedure are the challenge has been made. You are to immediately put the question without debate to the committee.
All right. You see that the chair has been challenged on his decision. In the decision that I stated was that that type of language be refrained from in this committee, and as the chair, that I would try to maintain decorum, and I have been challenged on that, and so we will now take the vote. All in favor of the
to sustain the chair.
What's that?
That the ruling be sustained.
That the ruling of the chair be sustained. All those opposed? Okay, the chair has been overruled, so ma'am, that means that you can use whatever language you want.
Thank you. But again, it's not my language, it's what I was told. So,
go ahead, ma'am. You have...
And I do have a lot of respect for everybody here. Donc, je vous remets en contexte.
So, I will just put this back into context. I was interrogated. I don't know how long it was because I didn't have a watch, and it was very respectful. But then when the police officers weren't happy with my answers, they started to talk more roughly. They insulted me. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that they called me a fucking foreigner. And I found that very painful. I am a Canadian. I was born in Canada, and I don't want to be treated like a foreigner, even if I come from a different province. We are all Canadians. They also said that if I wanted to break things, I should go back to where I came from and break them there. The two inspectors left, slamming the door. They were frustrated. And when they came back in, which took some time, one of them came in and left the door open and told me that I was lucky because his colleague believed me, but if it had been up to him, I would have stayed a long time, and I was going to be freed without charges.
Can, if they have reasonable grounds to believe you committed an offense, to search you. There's common law authority to protect international dignitaries within reason. There's no common law authority that I'm aware of that entitles the police to exercise prophylactic scan detention. And that's what they were doing.
I've met with a number of people who were in your centers and in Maplehurst, among others, and all of the men that I met with told me that they were vaccinated without their permission in your institution. Is that usual practice? Was there an epidemic in your institution? How is it that they were vaccinated or injected with something without being told what it was, especially without their verbal consent? They even said, I don't want this, and they were injected anyway. So I would like to hear from you.
Took place, and I'm not aware of what you're referring to.
Ben moi, je peux vous... Ben écoutez, là, Monsieur Small, c'est votre prison, Maplehurst, c'est votre responsabilité, Maplehurst.
Mr. Small, it is your institution, I believe, Maplehurst?
It's one of our correctional institutions.
Donc, vous n'êtes pas au courant qu'il y a du monde.
So you are not aware that a nurse, somebody from a nursing environment, vaccinated people without their permission? You have no awareness of that?
Ça va mal à la shop, là. Tu sais, ça va vraiment mal, là.
Things aren't done very well in your shop, because you should be aware, you should look into this, because these people that were vaccinated against their consent, this is unacceptable. Even medications. I've worked in prisons, and we don't have the right to give them medication unless they are aware and consent. Is that not true?
I will review that matter and provide information to the committee as to what exactly took place.
Très bien. J'aimerais par contre, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like Mr. Small to look into this and come back to us with the information.
Remind all of us that we have allegations towards certain things.
Non, non, c'est pas des allégations.
No, these are not allegations. Mr. Chairman, these are not allegations. I met with these people, and they told me that they were vaccinated. They were not hallucinating. They were vaccinated. So these are not allegations, and I want to continue now, please. Mr. Small, you have here with us Ms. Poisson. I think she wasn't hallucinating either. Jacinthe Poisson was strip searched in the Vanier institution, and the strip search was done with the door open, and so any male guard was able to look in. Are you aware of this?
Not aware of that until I heard it from the witness.
Est-ce que c'est une pratique courante dans...
Is this a usual practice in the Vanier institution to strip search women in front of men?
OK. Donc, vous allez nous faire rapport.
So you will report on this as well to the committee? Because I don't think that Ms. Poisson is making allegations. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, you would be treating her as a liar.
And provide information to the committee.
Très bien. Je vous remercie, Monsieur Small.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Ms. Poisson. I read your testimony, and I met with you and your sister, and you said that when you went to court, the judge, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, told you that you were finally going to be able to sleep and to eat because you were going to Vanier. Is that what happened? Yes. About 11 o'clock at night, people started to be seen by the judge. I think there were about 10 people who were released. And so after 40 hours of detention, they were able to be heard. But then the judge said that she was tired and wanted to delay the rest of the hearings till the next day. So we were able to sleep in a bed, and have acceptable conditions. The judge seemed to be shocked by the conditions in which we had been detained. There was a rumor that we were going to be able to sleep in a bed, but that wasn't the case. Till 4 a.m., we were left in the basement of the prison, and as I said, it was freezing, and there was no place to lie down. And about 4 o'clock, we were taken to the Vanier institution. We were interrogated then. We were asked if we were crazy, if we were going to commit suicide. We were given a medical exam partially. There was another strip search, and yet again cheese sandwiches. We were not allowed to sleep still because we were 1 hour in a cell and then taken back to court. So the promises were never kept.
It's unfortunate, though, that we weren't able to interview those officers that were captured on video and still images, because we wanted to know who had briefed them about their authority. But again, we found the answers to that through the ministry in the passage of a regulation under the 1939 Act.
Another YouTube video from the G20 summit raising eyebrows tonight. It shows a confrontation between a group of people and police. And tonight, what one of the officers said is the subject of an investigation. Ron Charles has more.
This is just one of hundreds of amateur videos on YouTube showing police confrontations during the G20 summit. For many civil liberties advocates, this one stands out, not for what can be seen, police confronting activists, but for what can be heard. York Region Police doing G20 duty in Toronto tell the man in the black t-shirt they need to search his backpack. He refuses, leading to this exchange.
Canada, that's something. This ain't Canada right now. Oh. This is in Canada right now? No. Wow.
Ontario's Office of the Independent Police Review Director is investigating a complaint related to the officer's statement. In his report last month, Ontario's Ombudsman André Marin used the video as one example of how police brass spread confusion among officers on the street. He said a misinterpretation of special provincial legislation led to police wrongly believing they had expanded powers, and that led to widespread violations of civil liberties. This law professor says he finds it interesting that the activist knew more about constitutional rights than the police officer.
There are various indications that the police officers here from various police forces, Toronto, York Regional Police are identified, were exhibiting behavior that was directly contrary to the constitutional rights of the people involved.
A spokesperson for the police oversight body investigating says they don't comment during ongoing probes. York Region Police also refused to comment. And through a third party, the man in the video says he's too nervous to make public statements about the investigation. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
It uses this phrase over and over again that these were thugs and hooligans in Toronto, and I must tell you that the people I've talked to are that I've seen are young university students and people who wanted to peacefully protest. What's your observation? Were you thugs and hooligans? And were the people in that gym, were they thugs and hooligans, the 70 or 100 people that you saw? What was your firsthand experience?
This is people I've met. It's like we were a family. Everybody was very helpful to each other, and no, I don't accept that.
Did you see anybody commit in that gymnasium commit an act, or was there any discussion from any of you to commit an act of violence or property damage?
None.
No. It was specified between us that we should be really careful to... Pardon, j'ai tourné en anglais. Donc, qu'on devrait faire très...
We should be very careful not to do anything wrong, to not say anything to lead to any kind of accusation or charge, so that we were determined to do everything not to get anyone in trouble. I don't know anyone who committed a criminal act or intended to, or who said anything out of line. We just wanted to express our opinion, which is part of our freedom of conscience.
Question to you.
Time is up. I mean, just from my perspective, the G20 experience was, while I was arrested, I guess in my frame, I don't like being labeled as a civil rights or civil liberties kind of a thing. I mean, we should be looking at the daily violations that happen, and we should also be careful with how we apply the term civil liberties and civil rights. It doesn't apply to undocumented people or new immigrants waiting for status in Canada. They don't have civil liberties here. So as a movement, if we're going to stand in solidarity, we need to begin to change those rules and apply it as rights for all, regardless of status in this country. And for me, that would be more important because, the profiling that happened during G20 is applied throughout Canada to racialized communities, particularly black people in the city of Toronto and Aboriginal people throughout the country.
For real, yeah. And thanks a lot, Dave Vasey, for speaking the truth today. Speaking the truth, we're talking about justice for all the people involved in that were caught in the act, and we're outside the U of T Faculty of Law building, speaking with Adam. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name's Adam Letalik. I was born in Halifax, raised here in Toronto. I went to University of British Columbia, so I was out in Vancouver. Now I'm back here.
Awesome, thanks a lot. What's your website again?
Website's www.underoccupation.com.
Awesome, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Daniel.